And the next question sort of moves nicely on from that. And that was, as you touched on in the core program answer, in chapter 12, you talk about restoring the hips. So I guess sort of the two same questions: why are the hips important for low back pain, and what exercises or movements might people need to consider to be able to restore sort of a pain-free back?
Well, first of all, it won't surprise anybody that the studies have shown very well that people with stiff hips tend to get more back pain. And the reason is they have to use their back more because the hips are not performing what they're meant to do. Then all kinds of considerations then come into play. What kind of hip function does the person need? Do they need to deep squat, or is there other movement tools, perhaps a lunge, for example, that they could employ to avoid the pain trigger? So there's a bit of an emphasis right now, because I think of social media and things like that, where the deep squat has been a test of hip mobility, and yet when you watch a basketball player play, a footballer, a hockey player, it's actually hip internal external rotation. Golf would be another example where it's hip internal external rotation that determines how much stress eventually goes into the back. So restoring the hips, we would probably start more with internal external rotation than we would with the deep squat. And then the deep squat is very dependent on the hip anatomy that they have, whether they have a deep socket or a shallow socket, and that's easily assessed with the being on all fours and rocking the pelvis back towards the heels, for example. But anyway, there's a little bit of a start on restoring the hips. I did mention earlier that chronic back pain tends to inhibit the gluteal muscles, and people become hamstring dominant. When, for example, when they get out of a chair, they use glutes. They forget to use their glutes and use more hamstrings, which again is problematic for some people, and they wonder why they have more anterior hip pain. But when you extend the hips with the hamstring muscles, the line of action tends to push the femoral head into the front of the hip socket for more impingement, whereas a more gluteal dominant strategy tends to pull the hips posteriorly, and it will relieve the impingement somewhat. But anyway, all of that depends on the assessment, and many clues there on how to tune the hips.